Welcome, everybody. My name is Dan Smith. I'm the director of the Africa Initiative here at the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. And I'm also professor of anthropology. And it's my pleasure to host you all at this conference on the media and democracy in Africa. I want to start by just saying a couple of thank yous. We'll say them in a bigger, more robust way at the end of the conference, but there are two people who really made this possible. One is Chernoh, who you all know. All of you who were invited because Chernoh wanted you to be invited. So this is Chernoh's gathering in many ways. It's been a true pleasure to have Chernoh here since August. He is the first postdoc that we've had at the Africa Initiative, the inaugural postdoctoral research associate at the Africa Initiative. We have another one coming next year. And I'm confident that the work that Chernoh has been doing this year is going to assure us that in the future, when we want to continue the postdoc program beyond the first two, the powers that be will say, well, that was so successful, we're going to keep going. The other person who stepped out already, she often does that, works behind the scenes all the time, is Christy Kilgus. Christy is the logistical force behind this and pretty much everything we do at the Africa Initiative. You've gotten the emails from her with all the instructions, your hotel reservations, the connections for the travel. And she's the person who will help you get reimbursed and things like that when it's all over. So at the end of the day tomorrow, I'll try to make sure that Christy's here so we can give her a big round of applause while she's actually in the room. She's often not in the room, she's working somewhere. So I want to start by just reading the conference abstract because I think it does justice to what we're trying to do here. It's just a paragraph, but I want to read it. In recent years, threats to freedom of the press in Africa have increased substantially with alarming implications. I think we could replace Africa with other locations and be accurate as well. Throughout the continent, journalists face physical, verbal, and online attacks. Measures aimed at intimidating, silencing, and punishing those deemed as threats include imprisonment, displacement, and de facto exile. As of December 2024, the Committee to Protect Journalists reported that 67 journalists were imprisoned across Africa, which is 20% of the 361 jailed globally. In addition to arbitrary imprisonment, African countries are increasingly weaponizing laws against journalists, using national security, anti-terror, and cybercrime legislation to justify crackdowns on free speech and democratic expression. While these developments are not unique to Africa, emphasize that, right? The continent has experienced various kinds of authoritarian and anti-democratic regimes, from elected autocrats to military dictators to kleptocratic civilian presidents, that are particularly threatened by an antagonistic toward a free and vibrant press. How have journalists in Africa responded to these authoritarian regimes and their continuing crackdowns on free speech and media freedom? What lessons can we learn from African media responses to democratic backsliding in Africa and beyond? What role can the academy play in advancing free speech and media freedom? How can journalists and academics collaborate in advancing democracy and protecting free speech? The conference brings together journalists, academics, and press freedom advocates to examine the status of media freedom and democracy in Africa and how journalists and academics can collaborate in advancing free speech and democracy. So I want to just highlight the schedule. You all have it, but for those who are watching us online, they don't. So after I make these very brief opening remarks, I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves briefly, the participants who we invited to introduce themselves briefly. Then we have a panel on the state of democracy and press freedom in Africa, kind of setting the stage for the conference. That's followed by a panel on investigative journalism techniques and challenges. So the first panel will be from 1:45 to 3:15, then a coffee break. Then the investigative journalism panel from 3:30 to 5. Then we have another break just to kind of stretch out and so on. And at 5:15, we'll have a keynote address from Elections to Coups, Journalism in the Era of Instability in Africa by Sadibou Mara from the Sub-Saharan Regional Director, who's the Sub-Saharan Regional Director of Reporters Without Borders. Then we have a reception from 6:30 to 8. And I want to alert everybody that we're not taking you out to dinner tonight, so feast at the reception if you can. And then tomorrow we convene with a light breakfast at 8:30, followed by a roundtable on building collaboration, media, and the academy. Then a brief coffee break. Then another roundtable on financing independent media. And then we have our second keynote address at lunchtime. So we'll eat lunch and listen to the keynote at the same time. The Global Assault on Press Freedom and What It Means for African Journalists by Mohammed Abdul Fattah, the Communications Director of the Committee to Protect Journalists. That will be followed by a panel on media, new technology, and artificial intelligence. And then the final panel tomorrow afternoon will be a roundtable on the future of the media and democracy in Africa. And let me just say a couple things about how we hope this will all unfold. We have what we call panels and roundtables and keynote addresses. Obviously, the keynote addresses, someone's going to get up and speak, but there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers and discussion afterwards. For the panels, the idea is that people will present brief but kind of structured presentations about the work that they do in a way that reflects or represents or speaks to the theme of the panel that they're presenting on. The roundtable is a little bit different. People aren't going to present like with PowerPoints or prepared remarks or anything like that. They've just been given prompts, questions to think about. And each person will speak for a shorter period of time, maybe 5 minutes or so. And then the moderator will follow up with a question or two for the panel, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Across all of these types of presentations, formats, the main thing we want to do is make it interactive. So we will err on the side of having the speakers be relatively brief and having the audience, you yourselves as participants, but also the rest of the audience, be as involved as possible. So with that, I want to ask everyone to introduce themselves. And I see we've started with a relatively small audience. So Christy told me that we had 50 people register for the conference just at Brown. There are not 50 people in the room right now, but a lot of those people registering are students who will cycle in and out over the course of the day today and tomorrow as well. But for the meantime, since we're such a small number right now, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves briefly. And since we're live streaming, please use the microphones. Just your name, what organization you work for, and maybe a sentence about what you do. So we'll start in the front here. Chernoh, you begin.
My name is Chernoh Alphaba. I am a postdoctoral fellow with the Africa Initiative at the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sadibou Marong. I'm a journalist by training. I come from Senegal in West Africa. I'm leading Reporters Without Borders work in Sub-Saharan Africa, and we are based in Dakar in Senegal.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Ann Wallace. I'm a professor of reproductive epidemiology at the University of Louisville. And yes.
Thank you. My name is Fatou Touray. I am the founder and CEO of Kerr Media from the Gambia. And I'm glad to be here with all of you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sheriff Bojang Jr. I'm a journalist. I work for the Africa Report, which is a Paris-based publication that focuses on politics and business in Africa. And I work as a deputy political editor with focus on geopolitics and security.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alexander. I work for EIF, the Environmental Investigative Forum, which is a non-profit global network of environmental investigative journalists. And I recently joined the newsroom, the global newsroom of The Examination last week. So I'm in these two job titles.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hamad Abdel Fattah. I run communications at the Committee to Protect Journalists. As you know, we're a press freedom organization and journalism protection organization. We document attacks on the press every year. Very glad to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Enwena Kai Gates, and I'm an assistant professor at Community College of Philadelphia. I teach in the English and Black Studies department.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zubaida Ismail, a Ghanaian journalist based in Ghana. Ghana is correspondent for Reporters Without Borders, so that's my boss there. And then I'm also an investigative freelance journalist, specifically on environment. Thank you.
And those of you who are joining us, please also, we're such a small group, we want to know who you are too. We have time for that. So.
Hi, my name is Danica Damwa. I'm a Ghanaian international student here at Brown studying economics and international public affairs.
Hi, Hi, everyone. My name's Amani Diallo, and I'm a second-year student studying international and public affairs and African politics.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Johnson. I teach history in the department here at Brown.
Hi, I'm Adam Levine. I'm a professor of emergency medicine and international and public affairs here at Brown and director of the Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Studies here at the Watson Institute.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome, everybody. So we're running ahead of schedule. I think that's not going to be the case all the way along, but we'll try to keep the schedule as much as we can. I guess I will end by again welcoming everybody and saying thank you so much for coming. And we look forward to a productive set of conversations. I want to remind everybody that we are live streaming. So what you're saying is going out into the world on live stream. Now we're recording it. It'll be available on YouTube. I think we felt that we couldn't have a conference on media and press freedom and democracy in Africa and decide that, we better not make ourselves available to the world. But it's important that people know that they're being live streamed, they're being recorded. This will be accessible after the fact. So be aware of that. But I think our message is we want to be examples of press freedom and freedom of expression and so on. So that's why we opted to do it this way. All right. So those who are in the first panel, the idea will be that you come up here and be at the front. If people are presenting and they have material, feel free to stay in the audience to watch your fellow panelists. As you like, you can stay up front or you can be in the audience. But at the end, after the presentations, then everyone will come back up to the front and we'll have the discussion with the panel in the front of the room. Okay. So the first panel is the state of democracy and press freedom in Africa, and it's Chernoh, Sharif, William, who's, I believe, with us virtually, Fatou, and Pamela, who's not here yet, right?
Thank you, everyone. I am the one moderating this first panel.
Yeah.
And we have some of our colleagues on Zoom. So what we will do is that the presenters will, I think, speak for between 10 to 15 minutes, and then we can open it up for conversation. We have Sheriff Bojang, the Deputy Political Editor of the Africa Report. Sheriff has already introduced himself. And William Onyango is the General Secretary or Secretary General of the Congress of African Journalists from Kenya. He was unable to be here in person, but I think William is going to join us via Zoom. Yeah, that's William. You want to introduce yourself? So we will know.
Well, I could.
Okay.
Yeah, my name is William Onyango. I'm the Secretary General of the Congress of African Journalists. I'm based in Kenya.
Okay. And then we have Fatou Touray of Kerr TV. Mm-hmm. And Pamela Amunazo is a BBC correspondent in Congo. I don't know if Pamela is okay. Pamela hasn't connected on Zoom. Okay, so we will go ahead and maybe we should start with William since he's on Zoom. If you have a presentation, do you have a PowerPoint or you can hear?
I'll just speak from my notes.
Okay.
Give me one minute, 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So can I go on?
Yes, please.
Yes. So I have some speaking notes. As I said, my name is William Oloo. I'm based in Kenya, but the Congress of African Journalists works across Africa. And I can see our colleagues Sadibu and a few others there. What I wanted to say in terms of the state of democracy and press freedom in Africa, I want to first talk about the situation of democracy. And I want to say that as we speak now, last year, that is 2024, 19 African countries had elections. And this included Comoros, Ghana, Madagascar, Senegal, Rwanda, Mali, South Africa, and many others. This year, as we speak, 18 other countries will be having elections. And this, of course, includes countries like Cape Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, Malawi, Comoros, Central African Republic, Gabon, Burundi, Malawi, quite a number of countries, including Tunisia. And as we speak again now, a few other countries are having trouble. Like South Sudan has postponed its elections 5 times. And as we speak now, there's the fragile peace that has been there for a while. And but there are difficulties, of course, within the government because the peace agreement allowed the former guerrilla leader called Riek Machar to join government. But right now he's under house arrest because of troubles in certain areas of the country where it is thought he and other officials were involved. And in Niger, in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Gabon, Chad, these have had military coups, especially since 2020, and therefore the transition to democracy has not just worked out. So we are talking about Africa, where elections are held in certain countries, but you'll find that the process of elections is not deemed as free and fair. And this brings a lot of conflicts. And in some of those countries, you'll find that there are lifelong presidents or lifelong leaders and who do not want to vacate power. And some have actually even decided to amend their constitutions to prolong their stay. And again, in some of those countries, there are parties, political parties that have found a way of prolonging themselves in power. And the other thing is that in a number of those countries, the political rivals, especially from the opposition, are either jailed, killed, and some of them, of course, are not allowed freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. Let me just give you the example of East Africa, for example. In Tanzania, the main opposition party, Chadema, and its leader have been banned from participating in this year's elections. And then in Uganda, the leader in Tanzania is actually under arrest. In Uganda also, the opposition leader is under arrest and is being tried in a military barrack. Yeah, so the lack of credibility in elections, the longevity of some of the leaders, more or less through undemocratic means, and a lot of conflict, some of them ethnic, some of them based on other factors like the DRC, that is, where we have had, rebel groups fighting the government, and it caused a lot of conflict that goes beyond that particular country. So the picture I'm painting about democracy in Africa is that the situation is not stable. A lot of countries have gone through a lot of upheavals. There are, of course, some countries that have managed to do elections successfully. Some have had transitions that have worked, but generally across the continent, there are difficulties. Now, when it comes to press freedom, the picture I've painted across Africa, therefore, affects press freedom, because if there are no credible elections, if leaders are being jailed, if and not only the leaders, but you find that some are banned, some of the parties are banned, and so on. So this, of course, means that the regimes in power often clamp down on the press because they don't want a free and independent press. And that has also led to a lot of problems for individual journalists, media houses, and of course, press freedom generally. In a number of countries, you will find that the regulatory environment is controlled by the government. The government takes charge of the regulatory bodies or causes them to actually, clamp down on journalists and so on. So if you look at the state of press freedom in Africa, what I would say is that media in many countries are muzzled, either directly or indirectly, as I've indicated, by the regulatory bodies, but at the instigation of government. And the regulatory bodies often withdraw, licenses or arrest journalists or prosecute them. Some of the journalists are actually held without being prosecuted. Last year, we at the Congress of African Journalists launched what we call the Africa Media Lawyers Network to try to intervene in a number of cases, do research, respond in terms of areas that require litigation. And towards the launch of the African Media Lawyers Network, which we did in Ghana, Accra, Ghana, during the third Africa Media Convention, we did some survey across Africa, and we found out that there was in 36 African countries, there are laws that are being used to prosecute journalists. The laws have been there from independence. Some of them have been revised, and the revision or the change of laws is often to punish journalists or constrain the space for press freedom. We also did a survey in about the same number of countries, and we produced a list of journalists that are facing prosecution. Of course, from last year now, a number of changes have occurred. There are more journalists that have either fled or are in jail or have been arrested for one reason or another. And I'll give you the example of especially countries like Burkina Faso. We are dealing with a case in Burkina Faso where 3 journalists, especially 2 leaders of the local journalist association, we issued a critical, statement, calling for greater press freedom. The 2 leaders and a third one from a TV station that covered their Congress were all abducted, and for days nobody knew where they were. When reports emerged, they had been conscripted into the army forcefully by the government, and there was a video during the circulating where they were in military uniform and under armed guard. So it's a very difficult situation. The same is in Niger. The same is in Mali, where if you raise your voices, either you could be conscripted in the army, or you could be arrested or abducted or kept incommunicado. So the situation is very difficult in Togo, Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, as we speak now, there's a journalist in jail for having interviewed a former guerrilla, a former war veteran, who was with the former President Mugabe. Right now, the current regime that succeeded Mugabe does not want the war veteran to be interviewed because, he's critical. Guinea, Gabon, and Ethiopia, and even in Kenya, where I am, the situation around press freedom is getting extremely bad. And last year we had protests, and those protests led to the injury of a number of journalists. A number of journalists were injured. Now, December last year, Committee to Protect Journalists actually reported. I think it is in the abstract of the concept. about 65 journalists that are in jail across Africa. And the International Press Institute also has in his report around 158 cases of arrests, detention, and in sub-Saharan Africa particularly. Yeah, so the situation is then very difficult because a number of journalists are put through a lot of violations. And in these cases, it is more or less the state is actually guilty. I want to make a conclusion by saying that in terms of media and democracy in Africa, the fragile democratic situation affects media freedom. And therefore, there is need for a lot more work, a lot more advocacy, a lot more research to try to ensure that the situation in Africa improves. I'll be happy to welcome any questions.
Yes. Thank you very much for that opening. It's a nice way to open the conversation. So we will take Fatou Touray next.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chernoh. And I want to acknowledge PPJ here because I was exiled some years back in 2013. And when I came, this organization really helped me put my status together. So I'm glad that you guys are here. Thank you for the support that you gave to some of us when we had to flee dictatorship. I want to thank the Watson Institute for this great opportunity to reflect on something that is very dear to our heart, press freedom and the state of democracy in Africa. When we speak about press freedom, we are not merely talking about the rights of journalists to report news, but we are speaking about the lifeblood of democracy, the public's right to know, to question, and to participate, and to hold power to account. In Africa, and particularly in the Gambia, where I come from, these ideals are yet to be fulfilled. They are contested and still very fragile. The Gambia's journey is of transition. A small West African nation emerging from 22 years of dictatorship. People celebrated with hope when the Jammeh regime was ousted by elections. Nobody ever thought that would ever happen in our lifetime. Some of us were here. Other people spent their entire career in other countries, especially Senegal. Senegal was a host to so many Gambians who had to run for their lives. But the role of the media was very crucial at this point. The media played a role in exposing past abuses, giving voices to the public, and also create a space for civic participation. But the transition rarely linear, as glow of the political change deemed the old ghost, censorship, intimidation, and the misuse of state power began to creep in. And in our case, it did not knock gently. It barged with calculative perceptions. At Kerr, an independent media house that I led, felt the weight of the regression. In 2023, all state parastatals that we had business with canceled their contracts with my organizations, taking millions of resources from us. And this was the test to our faith. This was a test to our work. It was a difficult and very challenging time for our network. But our colleagues were also harassed, detained. In fact, our presidential reporter was harassed at presidential events. One of our hosts was detained for over 72 hours, dumped at night in a swamp of water, and then we had to go to court. Imagine taking the Gambia government to court because one of our reporters was harassed and unlawfully detained. And when the courts declared his arrest unconstitutional and ordered the government to pay, they never respected the court orders. In fact, up to I speak this moment, his phone and some personal belongings are still with the police, even though the court has ordered them to give it back to him. That never happened. All of our resources were taken away. Our team have been labeled, our name is Kerr Fatou, but at this point, most of the presidential camp call us Kerr UDP. We're labeled as one of the biggest political opponents. So that's the name they call us. So at Kerr Fatou, the media As a woman at the helm of this newsroom of over 20 staff, most of them young women, this struggle takes on another dimension. Our female journalists endure harassment simply for doing their job. Myself being openly ridiculed on political platforms, presidential platforms, calling for my arrest. The president has gone so far to suggest that our platform exists solely because his government's tolerance, as if press freedom was a gift to be granted rather than a constitutional right to be protected. This rhetoric is not just dangerous, it is corrosive, it seeks to delegitimize journalism in a public good, it paints the media as an adversary rather than a partner in nation building, and yet we press on, not because it is safe, but because the cost of silence is far greater. And the Gambia is not alone. Across Africa, independent media is under siege. In Ethiopia, Cameroon, Sudan, Uganda, the story is painfully similar. Political interference, economic strangulation, the weaponization of laws to criminalize reporting. In some countries, entire newsrooms have gone dark. In others, the truth has been buried beneath propaganda and disinformation. At the heart of this crisis is a dangerous erosion of public trust, not only in the government, but the media itself. The funding dries up and digital platforms rewarded sensationalization over substance. Many of our outlets struggle to survive. Those that remain often find themselves torn between ethical journalism and financial necessity. So where do we go from here? I believe that safeguarding democracy and freedom in Africa demands urgent coordinated actions, and some of these will help legal protection and enforcement. We must push for stronger laws, like in the Gambia, we still have laws that can send us to jail for just merely reporting. Recently, one of the major newspapers reported that the president is thinking of not running a third term, and he suggests they they had a source that one of his partners will be will be their candidate. The proprietor and the reporter that reported on this were arrested, detained, and even the president sued them. Can you imagine the press union and some leaders in the media had to go to the presidency to have the president drop this case? This is what we're facing in that country right now. Financial independence. Our media houses must become economically resilient. That means developing innovative measures. In a country like mine, when government takes your resources and then we cannot even monetize the content we produce. In Gambia, you cannot monetize YouTube, you cannot monetize Facebook, you cannot monetize TikTok. So at the end of the day, what do? So we have to come out with innovative ways of how to sustain our media houses, and that has been a challenge. And another thing that is also a challenge is most of the grants that we get as independent media is from embassies, and now we all know what is happening. Donor funding is drying up. So it left us in a position where we have to choose whether to dance to the tune of government and parastatals, or maybe just put the lights off in the newsrooms. So these are some of the challenges we face economically. But as journalists, we must also earn the trust of the public through fairness, accuracy, transparency. We must be brave enough to report on the truth, even if it's unpopular, and be humble enough to admit our mistakes. I think that is very important, because that is how we must also earn the trust of the public. At Kerr Fatou, these are not just abstract ideals. They are principles that shape our founding. I launched this platform after returning from exile, not just to report, but to help build a Gambia that listens, that learns, and that heals. We began with a single camera, a second-hand laptop, but today we were committed to fierce commitment of telling stories that others would not, stories that are forgotten, the marginalized, the released, and stories that matters. We trained mostly young women who never thought of being in the media, but today we can proudly say over 50% of our team are women, and they're below 35 years old. As we gather here in this great institution, I want to urge you all, let us not just reflect, but to act. Let us form alliances from across borders between journalists, academics, funders, and civic society. Let us advocate for policies that protects our rights to tell the truth. But let us remember that democracy cannot flourish in the dark, and that the press, when free, is not the enemy of the people, but it's the voice of the people. And I think that is what we stand for, and that is what we continue to advocate for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. Okay, so we go to Sheriff.
Thank you. And I think it's brilliant that I'm here on the same table with Fatou, because we've not just been colleagues, but in the Gambia, most of the time we fight the same fight. So many times he got beaten for my crimes. I, like her, was also in exile. Mine was much longer. I was in exile for 15 years. 10 out of that was in Senegal, Sadibou's country, a country that I embraced, that was so kind to me to an extent. Sometimes I forgot I was in exile. Unfortunately, I never managed to learn French. And I was also president of the Gambia Press Union, which is the umbrella organization representing all media practitioners in the Gambia at the toughest time. That's just right after the end of dictatorship, because what that dictatorship did in the Gambia was that it killed journalism completely. We had to start. There was no journalism. We had to start to bring people, to teach people, to tell people what their responsibilities are. So that was the time I took over as president of the press union for a 3-year term. And I remember immediately I got elected president of the press union. 2 days later, I was with friends at the beachside, a popular beachside, partying, enjoying ourselves, getting to know people and the country again. And then a call came in. A journalist was brutalized by the paramilitary. And I remember my first thought was, why now? I'm at the beach. Then I had to stop everything with my colleagues. One of them was the Secretary General of the Press Union. We had to rush. That story continued because things got worse and worse. But what I'm talking about here today is not just about Gambia. As editor at the Africa Report, my everyday task include commissioning reporters, editing reports, writing about Africa, every part of Africa. And there is a trend, especially over the last 4-5 weeks. For the first time, I've been with the Africa Report for a couple of years. For the first time, reporters, our very strong, resilient, dynamic reporters, I won't say they are countries for security reasons, who have never, the whole time I was there, they never did hide their names. For the first time, the last 1.5 weeks, 2 incidents where reporters will say, can you use a pen name for my report? And I mean, I have to put a disclaimer, I have nothing against Trump. Openly, I don't want my visa canceled or to find myself at some ICE facility in Louisiana. But I think a lot of things are changing in the Gambia. Journalists are afraid that what is happening here is emboldening dictatorship and the thirst and hunger for dictatorship. And that's the only explanation I have for reporters who've always proudly used their names for stories that are not even very complicated, to tell you as an editor to say, can you come up with a name? I spoke to one of the reporters recently and it was painfully depressing. And he's thinking of migrating because he feels he's not safe. Not that anything changed drastically in the country in terms of regulations, but what is happening here, he feels is going to impact on what happens in his country very quickly, which is a sad one. What a challenging, what a unique, what a very strange couple of years in Africa. And I want to quickly talk about 3 components of this: the good, the bad, and the ugly. On the positive side, we've seen democracy triumph. We've seen democracy flourish. excitement, hope. In Senegal, for example, a country known for its democratic resilience, a country known for its democratic maturity, but above all, a country where the citizens stand up and say no when they should say no. Where citizens, especially young people, put everything at stake, where they risk their life to come out and fight for what is right for everybody. We know what happened in Senegal a couple of months in the run-up to the elections. We've seen how the former president Macky Sall, tried to hang on to power. When the citizens told him and saw him that to our dead body is not happening, he changed tactics to delay the country, to disrespect the country, to flout the constitution. And everybody thought Senegal, you see from New York Times to whatever, every analyst agreed on this one thing: Senegal's democracy and strong democratic credentials were at risk, were under threat. And this is how everybody got Senegal wrong, because democracy can be messy. Democracy is not the easiest thing. Democracy is not given, it is earned. And each time Senegal go through events that will give the impression or scare the whole world that it's coming to an end, despite not experiencing coup, despite having strong institutions, Senegal always wins at the end. So this is what happens again when, democracy is not when everything is right. It's when it gets messy, how you rise up to it and how you fix the mess. This is what democracy is. And Senegal always wins. Fast forward the story, we see what happened in Senegal today in terms of leadership, in terms of the outcome of an election that a president worked so hard to control, to manipulate. We've seen the same in Ghana. I'm glad two Ghanaians are here. Ghana is always an example. When people talk to you about Africa being the example of anything that can be wrong in the world, the first thing you say, look at Ghana. Ghana is always the pride of Africa when it comes to democracy. We've seen other places. We've seen what happened in Namibia recently. They have a female president. Yeah. It's victory, and it's not just a female president because she's a woman, but because she is a strong woman who deserves to be president, and that person happens to be a woman. We've seen what happened in other countries, passing the baton from one leadership to the other. On the other side of the aisle, we've seen democracy and everything that has to do with democracy being threatened. We've seen countries in the Sahel. The first speaker mentioned Burkina Faso. We've seen Mali. We've seen Niger, because each time these military coups happen, each time people take the law into their own hands, change of government through force, media and journalists are always victimized. In those Sahel countries now, nobody is safe. Journalists are not safe. People are leaving. People are forced to leave journalism to go to other areas that they feel is safe. Freedom of information, there is no more free flow of information. We've seen people, even for merely expressing themselves, and it doesn't matter what you talk about. It's not just politics. We've learned that in the Gambia, where during dictatorship, 22 years of dictatorship, political journalists are not talking about politics. People go from politics into sports. They were commenting about football, sports, and they felt that was the easiest thing. But then a journalist, one of them currently here in this country, people went to jail for, sports journalists went to jail for asking about the money that was invested in a club or that the president gave to somebody. So quickly you realize that this is not, and there is no anywhere to hide, no safe journalism under dictatorship. We've had situation in the Gambia where journalists, full-fledged journalists, went into DJing as disc jockeys, entertainment. But then even playing the wrong music could send you to jail in the studio. So we've seen that in these Sahel countries, we've seen people, currently journalists in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, what they are going through. We've seen the state of democracy eroding quickly on a daily basis. You know, you go to Kenya, is Kenyan, you go to Kenya, you know what is happening in Kenya. Kenya, whatever democracy is in Kenya is it's on the line. Whatever is happening in Kenya is dependent on the event. We've seen what happened during last year's Gen Z protests, when people were brutalized, people's right to information, everything was affected in Kenya. And then the third tier, you have the dinosaurs, the three dinosaurs of Africa. You have Equatorial Guinea's president, you have Museveni, Uganda, and then you have Paul Biya in Cameroon. Sit-tightism and sit-tight leaders. They will never go. And in each of those countries, democracy suffers, press freedom suffers. Everything that any democratic country stands for is dysfunctional in those countries. The inner circle, their families and their political inner circle are the only ones that enjoy in those countries, are only ones that are in power in those countries. But despite all that, there is hope. For me, I take solace and comfort in the power, the rising, especially recently, the growing power of young people, and especially social media activism, the hashtag activism. From Kenya, Ruto, hashtag Ruto must go, to NSAS in Nigeria, we've seen how young people rise up. We've seen how young people are not just taking part in the electoral process, are not just voting, but then they also taking part in everything. They're fighting for what is right in those countries. And when I see, I've covered a lot of all these protests in these countries, and when I see young people, when I see a Senegalese protesting in the street, a young Senegalese with a message, a big message, in front of his shirt to say, if I die, for example, either in Wolof or in French, if I die, please tell my mom I did my best and stuff. You see the determination, you see the passion. They know that, anything could happen to them. Because the military, the police were using force, live rounds on people. So many young people die. But if you could have that message, leaving your family at home, you didn't have to go and protest. In a lot of places, nobody does anything. But then the fact that young people could do, and they can capitalize on the power of the social media to make bad governance and to make government and governance difficult for these dictators. I think that is going forward. That is comforting for me. And I think across Africa, if the young people with the same determination continue, probably there will still be a lot of, I'm not sure the three presidents, Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon, and Uganda, probably, I think there's all indication they're going to die as presidents. But then at least we can avoid those situations from happening in the future. We can discuss more.
Okay.
Yeah, we I don't know if we have Pamela on Zoom. No, okay. So at this point, we've had three great presentations. So I would like to open it up for comments, reactions, responses, and questions. I have mine, but I will give the floor to the microphone. Yeah. That's the small one.
Hey, hello. Yes, it's working now. Thank you. When I see people like you, I always go like, thank you, seniors, because some of us we're still babies in the field. And I personally appreciate your personal stories, your courages, especially Fatou. I was glad when I saw that and I was like, okay, I'm going to meet her. Well, my question, however, is, with all that you've said, do you think that democracy generally is good for Africa? Now, why am I asking this question? And it doesn't mean that I'm against democracy, but I've listened to people argue, especially on media platforms in Ghana, And there is this food for thought out there that democracy is not for Africa. And what's the argument they're making? That they think that democracy, the process of electing our leaders through the ballot box, is just a platform for those leaders to impoverish the people. Okay, so you vote for somebody, people go queue. I mean, you know how passionate we are about elections in Ghana. My sister there will tell you when it is time for an election. I don't know about other countries, but in Ghana, our elections are held on the 7th of December, right? What happens is that on 6th of December, as early as 3 p.m., you have people already queuing for an election that is going to open the next day at 7 a.m. You have people sleeping in the dark just to vote for somebody. So it tells you how we take that process serious. People want to vote, no matter how angry they are. And it shows in the recent election, as you said, where for the first time after our first election in 1992, we've had a sitting government losing to an opposition party with a heavy margin. You have the opposition party getting just 38%, which like the lowest you can see. That's how Ghanaians were angry, and that's how they registered their anger. But then the argument, like I'm saying, is people think that we only do that and we give people power to come and improvise us. And some would want to twist the laws to keep staying in power, like Macky Sall wanted to do in Senegal. So yes, I'm going back to my question. Do you think that democracy, with these examples, do you really think that it is for us? Or maybe we should have our own African indigenous way of democracy so that we can put our people in checks? That's my question to all of you.
Thank you. And I must say, I followed the Ghanaian.
I don't know if we can take maybe an additional.
Oh, we
question.
want. Okay, all right.
That's good. Yeah.
The Ghanaian.
Another Ghanaian.
Sadibu. After that.
Hi, so I really enjoyed the panel, and I just had a question that for like us younger students who are like outside of Africa, but we're African students, do you have like any advice on actionable things we can do? I know all of you spoke about the power of young people, but is there anything you want us to keep in mind or pursue? Just parts of the mission of just advancing media freedom and democracy.
I think Sadibu has a question too.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm actually very glad because I have learned a lot of interesting perspectives. To be honest, I don't have a question, but I just have an overall contributions to each of our distinguished panelists. I might start. Let's put it like start with what for me is a hope, as Sheriff was just explaining. Yes, I mean, all what we have seen in recent years, I mean, as hashtags in Africa might be considered as hope in kind of in terms of, putting pressure and so and so. But if we put it into the wider press freedom landscape, the coverage of all those hashtags, for example, like EndSARS in Nigeria, Ruto must go, and so, has carried a lot of press freedom violations. For example, journalists have been attacked, for example, in Kenya. We have the case of Catherine, William might know, and nearly 20 journalists also has been also attacked. And this is, I mean, the difficult side, but it's hope also. Let's put it like hope, interest, and hope, and try to build some lesson and learn on that as we go. The other thing also for me is the fact that William, I think you were talking about the Pan-African Lawyers Union. Maybe it is good to stand a bit on that and maybe to highlight the fact that many African journalists who have been arrested in recent years, they need something which is very important. It is a lawyer. Unfortunately, in our context, many of the lawyers, they are asking money. It's very hard and difficult, for example, for us working as press freedom advocates, for example, to have a lawyer who's going to work as a pro bono on a case because there's not money. We don't have a lot of money to pay lawyers, and it's more or less the same with many organizations, including the CPG. If I can. So from time to time, we can hire a lawyer for journalists arrested in some emblematic cases, but for all the time we cannot do that, and that's why it's important going forward, for example, to encourage those kind of union with Pan-African Union of Lawyers Union who will be able to take cases on pro bono basis, because the key word is pro bono basis. Unfortunately, it's something which has started, and we will be working with William because we have a small law association in West Africa with some lawyers, and lawyers also, if you identify them, many of them, they are very hesitant, for example, to take some cases of journalists because, first of all, I mean, they will be interviewed more and more, but there is no money about that. And sometimes also, if it's a political journalist, a critical journalist, they might fear for their businesses out there with the governments. Some governments, they will tell the label, if you take the case, we're going to remove our contracts with you. I mean, these are really, really challenging situations, but it's good to put into the overall table. Coming to Gambia, Fatou, I truly recognize the resilience of your media organizations. And we are in the US. I know you have been living here for different, because Jammeh himself did not want you. Otherwise, he gonna arrest you. And then that was true. And it's an example of resilience from what we have seen in the recent year. And we monitor a lot on Africa. I mean, it's sometimes very rare to see how women journalists in Africa, they fight and struggle to keep their media outlet going. Most of the media outlets in Africa are run by men. And it's extremely interesting in terms of resilience, in terms of capacity, in terms of being bold in front of sometimes dictators, but in front of sometimes those presidents like Barrow, I mean, who have been elected, but who, when they came in, started to behave like small dictators. I mean, it's important, and we applaud them, and we really applaud the situation. The last thing is things you have talk about the police, the search, the police who are keeping the phone of your reporters. From our monitoring, what we see is that is a trend. If you are a reporter on the ground, if they arrest you, first thing is your phone, and your phone is there are a lot of sources, and police, what they are interested in is not the phone, whatever the price is, it's the sources which are there, and now they are getting more and more developing with a lot of intelligence to hijack your phone, even if it is, to see you guys, you're going to speak with who at night, who are your sources, who. And sometimes also they are putting also some malware on their Pegasus. We have the case of Pegasus in Togo, and then this is also a trend in Africa, and then it is quite important, to be aware of that. The final thing is in relation to academics. We are at Watson, and it's important to start thinking. For example, we organization that are doing a lot of litigation. For example, we have the West African Court, West African Court of Justice. Sometimes we are trying to litigation, but litigation process are very slow, and it might take a year or two, or sometimes it is the court rejected. And what is important to me is starting for the international academics to think of strategies how to overcome all those challenges we have, for example, in terms of litigation. If we are, for example, if there are some law like sedition law in Gambia which are still taking place, how to attack those law in front of the African courts. We human rights organizations and press freedom advocates, they need also to work with academics. And then it's good for academics to start thinking on that. And I thank you very much.
Okay, so we can have responses.
So I think I'll start with my colleague from Ghana. I actually followed your election. I keenly followed your election. I think it was one of the more reasons why we should have democracy in Africa. I know it's messy. It can be crazy. You elect people with so much hope, but at the end of the day, just a few months down the line, everything that they have said is just gone in the air. But the good thing about the democracy, why we should have it in Africa, is that we can go back to the polls and vote them out. And if we don't have that system, what are we going to resort to? Is fighting and protesting and doing all the things that can bring chaos to our society. And at the end of the day, it becomes difficult to even govern ourselves properly. The same ideals that you are facing is what we faced in 2016. We went through one of the brutal dictatorships in the region. Our president said he was going to rule for 1 billion years. Nobody could say anything in that country. People were speaking. I remember when I came on exile, when I was in the United States, I was even scared to speak because I was thinking about my grandmother. She was old. My dad was telling me, please don't say anything. They're going to arrest us. Journalists were scared to speak because their families were going to be arrested. So it was crazy. Senegal was like home to so many people. Some of us who had visas had to come to the United States and other countries. And even when we were here, we could not speak. But when the change happened, 2017, I went home with less than $5,000. I didn't care what I had. I just wanted to go back home. I knew when I get home, I could do something. And people were so much happy and relieved that there was change. She's been in Gambia a couple of times. I think she told me she was there in 2016 when the elections was going on. It was tense. People had to leave. People had to flee when he said he was not going. But the hope that we had a new government, few months down the line, started eroding. And today the president can openly stand on podium. A few days ago, at the Correspondent speech, he was telling some of you journalists, you want to burn this country. And when I came on my platform a day after, and I'm not the very person who will respond to some of these things, but I was like, Mr. President, I'm as Gambian as you are. And I am not going to burn this country. I don't know why you believe my job is to hold you accountable. And when I said that statement, my dad came the following morning to my house. Fatou, please, you cannot address the president like that. Up to this day, people are scared of those kind of statements. And I said to Sheriff, I'm done. I'm just going to do my job and just move on. Because at this point, my grandmother is very old. She's scared of all the things that I'm going through. Because today, my media and 3 other medias are considered the most critical. Recently, the government said they signed contract with some media outlets and gave them almost $40 million of taxpayer money. And they selected their own media houses and gave them those. When we got to know about this, and people asked questions, they said, they're partnering with media houses that can highlight government achievements compared to some of us who are just doing the negative stories. But if you're giving them good coverage, if you're writing stories that are favorable to government, you are considered as a good media. If you're writing critical stories, then you're trying to burn the country. But just a few months down the line, this president was the one who said when he wakes up in the morning, the first thing he asks is, what is the media is saying? What is the diaspora saying? But today, that is a reverse. But we know that when he won the elections, people in 2021, a lot of people contested the results, the main opposition and others. But in the local government elections, the media and the advocates worked really hard to just make sure people understand what the state of our country was. And from Banjul to LRR, the sitting government had only one National Assembly member. And all the municipalities from Banjul to LRR, they lost it, meaning they're only governing the people in the rural areas. What that tells you is that the work we are doing, the enlightenment that we are doing is getting to them. And that's why sometimes Sheriff's brother is one of the most critical media owners in our country. They said he was responsible for electing the local government area in his region. And they accused me for helping doing the PR. I interviewed the deputy speaker and he said, we all know you are the PR campaign for the mayor of KMC. And I'm labeled that. I'm like, I have never received a check from that office. I don't know what you mean. But because we are very much vocal, speaking, and I tell my people, sometimes it's not just about our work as journalists, but also be able to advocate for the interests of our country. And when you do that, you are considered an opposition. And that's what we face today. And it's tough, it's difficult, but I think at the end of the reason why it's important to have democracy in our countries, especially in Africa, we can go back to the polls and tell them, look, you told us this, but today we're voting you out because you didn't do what you said. And I think that is the importance of having strong democracy in all African countries. I know the timeline could be long, sometimes 4 or 5 years. In our situation, our president told us he's not a fan of 3 terms or beyond 2 terms. But today he told us he's going to run for a 3rd term. We don't have term limits in our constitution because our constitution was in the dictator, had an open, but we had, when he came, the fundamentals of this government was transitional justice, constitution, and security reforms. We never had a security reform. The transitional justice is still dragging, no reparation and all this. Our constitution, we had a commission set up. They came up with a recommendation, but because there were issues that said the president cannot run for a 3rd term, he sponsored National Assembly members that rejected that. And now the cabinet went on their own, drafted new drafts and brought it to the assembly. And the people said, no, we don't. We had a talk show that we created when they brought, and we said, we called it the constitution we want. And we started enlightening people what is in that constitution. And you go around the country, everybody's telling you, we don't want it. That is our role. So, but we don't have a 3rd term, we don't have term limits in our constitution, but we know we don't want it. And a lot of the Gambian people are saying through this messaging. So yes, it's important to have democracy. I know it can be messy, it can be painful, but I think it's important that we have democracy in our society. It's very fundamental.
Yeah. And before we take on the second question, just quickly on that.
William,
I mean, this debate comes up in Africa all the time.
Yeah.
Do we need, and whenever people say, do we need democracy, it's comparison between Western form of democracy and another interpretation, African form. But for me, I've always thought, let's leave out the name democracy and focus on the components of it. What are in democracy? A government that you put in power, a government that serves you, a government that you can scrutinize, you pay your tax, and you are compelled, you must demand that the government give you back what you pay in taxes. I think when it comes to those things, it does not have geopolitical dimension. It does not have race. It does not have, it's just human rights. Without that, and then like Fatou said, the other thing is, if we don't have that, what's the alternative? So what? But I think in terms of the components of democracy, there is no way out. I mean, those are what we have, because unless we have those, we are dead. We won't be alive. But then when it comes to people, let's say the question of, is this imposed on us and stuff? Of course, a lot of the historians will tell you, he knows better, will tell you, even before colonialism, the way we were living before, these things were there. They were always there, just that they didn't have a name, democracy, but they were always there. Yeah, and before Fatou will say to the young lady there, from my own experience, this is the closest I've come to university graduation. My life was too interrupted to go to university. I've never been. So I'm proud of this moment. This is my first entry to a university hall like this. And no disrespect, no nothing, but I don't feel I missed out much, even though now, I was telling Fatou this morning, I'm tempted to come to university. I've actually taken your brochures and stuff. Yeah. But because my brother, I come from a family of media people. My brother, the same name as me, was probably Gambia's finest, he's like, 16 years older, but Gambia's finest
reporter when I was young. And what motivated me into journalism wasn't just, I never knew journalism was you hold people to account, you give voice to the voiceless and all those cliche. All I knew was that I don't come from family of like rich or with opportunities and stuff. No, it's very working class family. But everybody in the country, when I was a kid, I saw people, everybody wanted to be friends with him. I passed by people, they're talking about his writing. Ministers, everybody in the country loved him, respected him, scared of him. And I grew up reading his Shakespearean satire. He was very unapologetic in his writings and then I wanted to be him. I didn't know whether I wanted to be right. I just wanted to be him. I wanted to do what he was doing, so much so that I will even imitate his voice when he's talking. Everything. I just want to be him. Fast forward, that's what got me into journalism. My brother, he's a broadcast journalist. He owned a radio station in exile. He was also in the Gambia. He was also in exile. And the one who is a writer at some point was, while I was there as voice of dissident Gambians in exile, my brother was the spokesperson of the government. I was Minister of Information. That was very difficult. When we talk family, we will talk, we will laugh. But in terms of policy, I'll be on Al Jazeera going after him. And that became very, but then that's how, what worked for me was mentorship. Whatever you need to do, think of a mentor. Who does this the best? Who can I see myself becoming in the next 10 years and stuff? And then there are things to the four corners of this room cannot teach you. That's your own. I know I missed that, even though I said I don't feel like I missed something. But then what university teach you is the preparatory stage of life. The first half of circle of your life is there. The second half connects. Connects when you take your own initiative, know what you want, and go for it. I don't think any university can prepare you for that. Your passion and doing what you want to do after you graduate from here, because in my part of the world, let's say in the Gambia, when graduation season comes in the Gambia, the only university in the Gambia, University of the Gambia, so many law, everybody is graduating law. And then sometimes like, so what do you want to do? So you talk to people who are university graduates or they are graduating in a week or something. What do you want to do after this? They have no idea.
Yeah.
So because it's a trend, university, you graduate, you have BSc and stuff. So what do you do with your life after university? So it shouldn't be, I don't think any professor's intention is that to teach people and then 4 years down the line, you find them just sitting, how is it? There's my professor. How is life? Complaining, nothing works. Because because you're not able to, but because you never figured out what you wanted. Maybe we always joke about that in the UK, every Gambian is studying travel and tourism, and then do what with it after that? Not because there is something wrong with it, but because people do the easy stuff for one reason or the other, because either you have benefits, they give you student loans and stuff which works for you, but at the end of the day, whatever you do, so you figure out what you want to do, find mentors, and look for the market for what you want to do as well, because you don't go to a place where you have more than enough lawyers and you still graduate as a lawyer, as a law student. So what after that?
Okay. Let me take William, if you want to add to the conversation.
It's very interesting. Very interesting comments there. Let me talk about democracy. Are you able to hear?
Yes.
Okay. Well, in terms of democracy, I'm in Kenya and we have had our problems with democracy, including post-election violence that killed over 1,000 people. And we had to have international mediators, Kofi Annan and many other people coming over to try to help us. at a time when it was thought that the Kenyan democracy was working. And, within the Kenyan context, we are thinking that the only democracy or the only successful election, which we consider free and fair, that has ever happened was in 2002, when we were replacing the former president, Daniel Arap Moi. All these others have been marred with fraud, and the margins have been very, very narrow. And after each of those elections, 2020, 2013, 2017, it was actually annulled by the Supreme Court, and they had to go for elections which the opposition boycotted. Now we had the elections in 2022, and the president who won with a slim majority of around 200,000, that is normally the range. He has had to run back to the opposition to create what is now calling broad-based government, because he was nearly run out of town by the Gen Zs. So without the opposition, because the opposition controls, the main opposition leader controls half the country. So, he comes from a community, Kenyan politics is ethnic-based. So he comes from a community that could not guarantee him survival following the onslaught, both from the opposition and also from, of course, the Gen Zs. So what I would like to say about democracy, and I'm looking at this from a historical point of view, and I'm a historian by training as well. The liberal Western democracy has had challenges in Africa. And the way it is being implemented, or the way it is supposed to work, is not working. It is too antagonistic. It brings a lot of conflict. It is the winner take it all. And to a large extent, you'll find that there is manipulation, both by the people who are, especially the incumbents, and also outsiders. In many African countries, when you hear of the electoral outcome, you will always see the hands of foreign powers as well, because they have interests. So increasingly, there is a discussion in Africa, and even in our Kenyan context, about what we call negotiated democracy. What our colleague from Gambia was talking about, because historically, African societies were fairly democratic. It may not fit within the liberal democratic context that we know from the Western countries, but there was always consensus building. So increasingly, and I've had discussions with the electoral agencies and organizations that are monitoring elections across Africa, and the discussion is moving towards saying, fine, democracy is good, but what are the elements of democracy that we can adopt? And can we look at the African context and what worked? And then we look at the Western, liberal democratic tradition and say, what is it that we can borrow so that we match the best out of that? In the Kenyan context, we have had, since we brought the new constitution, we have had what we call, at lower levels, what we call negotiated democracy. And in some regions of Kenya, communities and elders decide how to rotate the leadership, especially that of the member of parliament or governors. It is rotated, because without that rotation, then there would be chaos. So what I would like to say is that I think there's a lot of discussions around democracy, and journalists need to get involved in this space and shape narratives around democracy. What are the discussions? What is emerging, even from academia? Can we have more robust discussions from academia regarding the forms of democracy that work? And the thinking now is that the traditional Western believers in democracy are no longer, if you look at it, they are no longer very interested. Democracy and its ideals are being left for Scandinavian countries, because most of the countries that we thought were democratic are having more right-wing, governments coming into power. So that is, I'm just saying there's a discussion around democracy and what it can do. Now, quickly to the other area of young people. The young people, I think the issue is that young people must get engaged so that there's a level of civic awareness around what is happening across Africa. Because in our case in Kenya and across Africa, even in Nigeria, there is the zeal, there is the energy by young people. But do they understand the history of their countries? do they understand the struggles that there were before? Because in our Kenyan context, the Gen Zs told the old guard to sit back. And some of them didn't know the history of the struggle. So it was not enough to come out and protest, wave flags, and do TikTok. That was not strategy enough, because even in the traditional sense of fighting against dictators, it required much more, because you've got to look at certain strategies that worked even without the kind of technology we have now. So what I would like to tell my young sister, in terms of what they would like to do, I think my colleague from Gambia told you that at the university, there are certain life skills that universities will never teach you. There are a lot of real life situations out here that you must engage in, seek information out of the university. And if you are in the US and you are from Africa, then seek to get engaged with what is happening in Africa, so that you will understand what is happening. Because outside Africa, life could be bliss. But then there are certain realities. You run back to Africa and you find that it's a completely different thing. On the African Media Lawyers Network, the African Media Lawyers Network is the only continental network of lawyers that has so far come up. And in setting it up, we got the buy-in of a number of stakeholders across Africa. Actually, once we developed the framework, that's the Congress of African Journalists working with the Pan-African Lawyers Union. We have a Pan-African Lawyers Union based in Arusha, Tanzania, but has lawyers across Africa. The support of UNESCO. We had discussed this through a lot of regional frameworks, especially when we were looking at the UN Plan of Action and revising it. So then it was decided that it was important, because of the press freedom situation, violations against journalists, it's important to come up with a rapid response mechanism, and especially through pro bono lawyers. So it is at its infancy. We did get more than 60 stakeholders from across Africa, journalist organizations, press freedom advocates, and so on, getting involved to validate that and agree that it is important. And we launched it last year in Accra. Where we are now, we have about 15 lawyers on board, and many of them are persuaded that they need to act for the media space, and they're converted to saying it is not just about money. And some of them were journalists before and have studied law after. So the level of passion, the level of understanding about the media environment is also fairly high among some of them. We are creating a governance framework for it. We are going to go to the African Media Convention in Morocco, where we want to get more journalists to understand about it, more partners to understand about it, so that then we are able to get it moving to respond to the various cases that we see across Africa. The design of the Lawyers Network is that it will have rapid response. One, in terms of research. Secondly, in terms of engaging African governments, and we are working with the African Union, so that some of the recommendations we are actually making must speak to the African Union agenda and some of the resolutions they have put in place. So I think we are convinced that we'll get more lawyers on board who will not necessarily look for money as the first case of engagement. So as Sadiq was saying, lawyers are very expensive, and it is important for us to get the right people. We are also working with the legal organizations. Like in the Kenyan case, we have one called Katiba Institute. Katiba is Kiswahili word for constitution. And they have been taking cases to court on our behalf without asking us for a penny, including a case we have now in Kenya of SLAP against a very, very strong telecom company, which is pursuing a journalist for having demanded information because they work with government to sell out the agencies in terms of information from the forms. So we are hopeful, and working with the Pan-African Lawyers Union, we will convince more lawyers to get involved, and especially along pro bono lines. There could be facilitation, basic facilitation, like if they're running to a country, or we want actually many of them to be based in the countries where they are so that they are able to respond. But where we think that they can run to another country, there should be basic facilitation, but it won't be like the formal charges that normally lawyers take. After Morocco, we'll also meet. We are going to, the Pan-African Lawyers Union is having a conference in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. So we want to also go and have a panel there to bring the report from Morocco and get more lawyers to the Pan-African Lawyers Union to understand the urgency and the importance of getting on board, so that then they are able to help us within the press freedom space. Because that way, then we'll be developing the whole thing about African democracy, good governance, and a more enabling environment for all players in Africa. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So I would like to open it again for a second round of questions if people have questions or comments. Yes. Let's take some questions. It's a lot of information.
Hi, my name is Maya. I'm a student here at Brown with the Watson Institute and aspiring reporter. So thank you guys for being here today and sharing about your experiences. I had a question for Mr. Bojang. You mentioned earlier about the New York Times analysis and reporting from more Western media that got Senegal wrong. And I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit more on that and what would be your main message to correct this coverage and what would you want to see done better or differently?
So probably, oh, okay, sorry, yeah.
Oh, right there.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, one for each panelist. Sharif, you mentioned that there were hopeful notes for the youth and social media coverage and dissemination. I'm wondering what you think the limits or potential repercussions or consequences of social media might be, just as much as it could be a uniting and gathering force. What are the alternative elements to consider there? For Fatou, I really enjoyed what you had to say, and I learned a lot from you. I was hoping you could expand on this dichotomy of the ethical journalism versus the sort of concessions or compromises that journalists have to make. And you were giving some examples of what that would look like, and how do journalists in your position withstand that pressure? I mean, you sort of gave us a dire example of saying you just shutter and don't do anything and you don't continue and you do something else. But is there some kind of middle ground that still allows you to exist within the ethical boundaries, but also being realistic about those economic constraints? And then finally, for William, I'm a historian, so my ears were ringing when you were talking about the laws from the colonial period about suppressing journalism and how they are still very much in use and leaned upon now. And I was hoping you could say more about what those laws were, if they were ever amended, or if they were just adopted and transformed wholesale in the post-colonial period. I just think that's a very interesting continuity to reflect on. Thanks.
Thank you all. Super informative and useful in so many ways. I think will make for a lot of side conversations as we're having our coffees and lunches. Fatou, want to pick up on, you have a newsroom that's majority women. The journalism that they do and that your organization does is critical of power. They face many challenges. There's an interesting thread from Sharif about people using pen names now because of what's happening, with the U.S. administration and how that reverberates in Africa. Are you seeing that thread in your newsroom? That's number one. And do your people have safety concerns right now, or have they navigated safety concerns as women journalists, and what these safety concerns might be? I'm just curious.
Okay, we have one question. Adam Levy. I thought you. Oh.
Who? Yeah.
You wanted to say something?
You wanted to say something?
Yeah. His hand was up.
Thank you. I remember really well on the night of the presidential election in 2016 here in the United States, I was actually sitting with an African colleague of mine. We happened to be in Haiti at the time. He was from Chad. And he was telling me that Donald Trump was going to win the election. And I was trying to explain to him how that was totally wrong. And all the polls showed that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And he said, "That's fine, Adam, but I think Donald Trump's going to win." And I said, "Well, why?" And he said to me, "Because I understand tribalism." And I wonder what sort of advice you can give to us in the United States about how to manage a multi-ethnic, multi-tribal democracy, because we clearly have an issue in the United States of multiple tribes that right now have difficulty coming together to find consensus and just find more and more radical candidates to put forward. And then the second question, just a corollary to that, is what advice do you have to journalists in the United States now in terms of how to prepare for a more authoritarian and less liberal democracy, perhaps more similar to what you're used to?
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can just on the question of New York Times report and Senegal. So basically, not just New York Times, but it's almost all mainstream media. And most of the time, it's not the journalists, but then these comments would come from the analysts and experts that they feature. But I think it's just the context, is how people understand their context of democracy, but much more how they understand, or whether they understand what happens in Senegal and stuff. So I stand by my point that in Senegal, for example, just for the president to attempt to cancel to unilaterally cancel election does not threaten Senegal's democracy. But then how Senegalese react to that and what happens after that, that's the hallmark of democracy, how they respond. Because those decisions, a lot of decisions that were taken that could have undermined democracy. Of course, if it undermines it a bit, but then Senegal will always fight and they will always triumph. And looking back now, I'm sure all the people, the naysayers who said Senegal, as we know it in terms of Africa's democratic powerhouse, is gone, now they will have it different, because it was a bit, let me not say not even wrong, it was premature. And I guess sometimes people don't understand, and I can understand that oftentimes the Africa experts, if it doesn't matter where you come from, if somebody goes to Africa frequently, back and forth, you work on Africa and stuff, you become an African, or you are based there. And so, but then personally, my issue has always been let's say it's a foreign journalist or whoever, who is like, something happens, there is some coup is about to happen, then you catapult it into Chad or somewhere. You stay in a 5-star hotel, no dealings with even the locals and stuff. And then 2 months down the line, you are an expert on Chad. Which is unfair, which is not honest and stuff. So I guess that's just it, people, the context of it. And then probably my right might not be right, but then I think that the context in which they define threat to Senegal's democracy was wrong, because my belief is that Senegalese stood up. They fought, and now democracy is intact. So it wasn't a threat to it, or it wasn't even the end of the democracy and stuff. It was just part of the messiness of democracy. On the issue of the social media campaign, the hashtag, I think a lot of challenges. First is still, it's in terms of access to even internet across Africa is still a problem. But then the censorship, internet shutdowns are the new normal in Africa, in many parts of Africa. Something happened there, the first thing the authorities would do is to shut down the internet. The Gambia, what they will do is, I can't remember the terminology for it, where they slow the internet access. Yeah. So you can be there, and you opening email, it will take, before your email, you start opening it, you go sort out your life and come back before anything is loaded or something. So they will do that. But then, across Africa, that's a problem, the issue of, internet shutdown. So in order to have that access to even internet for your hashtag campaign drive, you need to have internet. And then now the authorities find a way of stopping that. But then for me, the main thing is how you get that message out of Twitter and stuff to the common folks out there. I think it's a process. More and more people are having just access alone. More and more people, so many places before in the Gambia and across, because I covered the whole of West Africa for a decade. Around maybe 10 years ago, some places you will go where probably you need to go on top of something, a place in order to have internet. Now you can easily have internet, and providers are also booming and stuff. There is a lot of competition and it's accessible, but still a long way to go. Another challenge with the hashtag, he will probably throw more light on that. So Kenya, among the top leaders of the Gen Z protests, I love them. I mean, for some reason, I don't know whether it's my background, I love protests and protesters. I protested so much that I joined the wrong protest in Berlin. It took me like a whole hour to know that this is not the right one. Then I had to fight because everybody was protesting, and the one I actually protested, and I came to know because everybody was looking at me like, why? I look around, I didn't see any black, and I'm like, no, this is the wrong protest. And I had to go. I was actually in a fellowship with RSF. I had to call and say, I think I joined the far right protest. And so it's like, where is it? I say, oh, that's the one by the way. Say, no, come here. Then I had to go to, again, I don't want my visa cancelled. I had to go to the Palestine one, and stuff. So I love protests. I love young people who stand up to, I love change of government. I don't know. I love these things. I don't know. Maybe it's what I came from in the Gambia and stuff. But then in Kenya, at least two of the top people who drove the Gen Z protests and stuff, now one causing up to the government, the other one joining the opposition. And then now there is and they even fighting, couple of the leaders are fighting over the use of a hashtag. What started as a united front, because the politicians have penetrated into it. When it happened, I covered a story that became one of the Africa Report's top in terms of it. I think now is on 31 million on Twitter. How Kenya's Gen Z inspired wave of planned protests across Africa. So I'm very close. I have emotional attachment to protest leaders across Africa because I did a lot of articles on it. Some of them, I remember one out of blue sent me, and they say, hey, this is my wife's number in case something happens to me. If you call me, you can get through. Call, she will tell you where I am, whether I'm arrested or killed or something in Malawi. And he told me how their planned protest, it was leaked to the government, all the plans within a small circle of leaders. And they realized that somebody, they're leaking their secrets to the government. Everything that they planned before they could do it, the government was 10 steps ahead and stuff. So in Kenya, maybe he will shed more light on that. That's happening. So this is all affecting the hashtag movement, because in the Kenya one was supposed, as in many other people, was supposed to be faceless, leaderless, because they believe if there is a leader, it's easy to manipulate that leader. So it was leaderless. You don't know who the leaders are and stuff, even though you know people who are, but everybody could speak. Everybody had the same powers within. But then even in the midst of that leaderlessness, I mean, the politicians find a way of, dividing them and stuff. So today it's not as strong as it was when the protest was happening and stuff. So, and the last one, before I pass it on, about the US, the tribe stuff, I'm not sure, but then, in terms of journalists, oh my God, I watch White House press briefings, the kind of questions journalists are asking Trump, White House spokesperson, and all these people, no journalist will ask that. Even in the middle of dictatorship in Africa, we don't ask this question. We ask bolder questions that the citizens want us to ask. We hold them to account. But now journalists at White House are asking Trump about how fit he is, you in good shape and stuff. Everybody become a praise singer. And I can understand. For me, the issue is sometimes it's not just you.
sometimes it's the media organization. If the people who are paying you are scared of the financial or whatever ramification, then it affects you. So I think media houses are under so much pressure. But for me, if they give in, just like universities across the country, if they give in, because this is what dictatorship looks like. I think the definition of dictatorship, we don't need to ask Daniel or ask some professor or go into history books. No, look at this country. This is the definition now. In this is the biggest definition of what dictatorship looks like. I mean, I can understand you are shocked. We are not shocked. We are used to it. This is a welcome to our life. This is what we know. So it doesn't shock us. For us, what really depressed me would be that it's happening here, not what is happening. I'm used to that. It's not a problem. But the fact that you can look and then the people, because when this happened, Trump's first term, the media stood up. The media fought. He fought with the media for the duration of his term. Mm-hmm. That's not happening. That is it's all going. There is no fighting spirit anymore because he is hitting them where it hurts the most. I never knew Associated Press would even need to go to court to have access to the White House. In the Gambia, there's dictatorship. In countries where you have dictatorship, people are still asking tough questions, even though they know that something is going to happen. Fatou is, all the money taken. And the presidency, they collapse like, 3 months, so it's going to fade away. No money, nothing. And I was always the first port of call. We discuss, it's like my dad say leave. And nobody would know this because in the Gambia, everybody know her to be the strong woman and stuff. So when people sometimes talking to me, it's like, oh my God, she's so strong and stuff. I'm like, yes, she is. Because I'm the only one whose shoulder she leaned on to cry. She cried so many times. But does that mean you have an opportunity? Does that mean you take your blue passport and come here? And stuff. Sometimes the dad will tell Sydney to leave. I say, well, it's not my message to her. I would have preferred that she stays and fight on, and she's not. But then, what do you do in a first-class country, where everything that's supposed to be the birthplace of democracy, and everything is about. So for me, I think the journalists, the media in this country, like in other places, if your financial power, your existence financially is dependent on Trump and the Trump administration, you have to find an alternative. I don't know if it's going to happen, but now the way things are going, anything is possible, including Trump beyond this term. So the journalists, the media houses, first of all, but I think the individual journalists need to make a decision whether they want to abide by, because I read many articles where media institutions are giving directives to the individual journalists to let them know that they are worried. So if your employers are worried about you being critical and inviting trouble to the media house, then you are worried because they pay you. That's a problem and stuff. So if they are not going to carry, they don't want you to be critical, they don't want you to have a problem, then probably you look for the alternative. And then if everything else fails and you still want to practice journalism, American journalists, please welcome to Africa. We'll humbly have you, and you can ask tough questions.
Yeah. And I think I'll pick up from where he stops. Before we used to, as journalists, when something happens, Chernoh knows this, the first person we get in contact with the embassy, the U.S. embassy. That's the big brother. That's the person they're scared of. So when journalists are in trouble, we know the MCCA project is based on the Press Freedom Index of countries. That's where they get these monies coming to countries. And so when their index is bad from the American context, they know they're going to lose some aid money. So they were worried about that. But now who do we look up to? That is the most scary part for me. I know when I went through this, I had to, because I'm also a U.S. citizen, I had to talk to the embassy, and they were really supportive and, very encouraging words, and some surveillance protection as well, just to make sure we're good. But now I'm thinking, who do you go to? In fact, 2 days ago, one of the junglers of the former regime was tried here in the US, in Denver. One of my reporters is covering it. And during the protest, the press conference by the state prosecutors, one of them said, America is not safe haven for any human rights violators. And everybody in the comment section was saying, but you have a dictator back home. So why are you telling us, these things? We used to look up to America. When we're in trouble, that's where we go to the embassies to tell them this is what we go report to them. Who do we go report to? And that is why it is more scary. The situation here is going to embolden dictators back home. And that is very scary for us. We're used to all of this that is happening here. So it's not a new thing to us, but it's that person that we report to is now acting the same way. So for us, who is going to protect us? That is very, very scary for some of us out there. And talking about tribalism, I think that is coming from us, actually. Because, in our countries, politics is defined by tribe. Where are you coming from? This political leader is this tribe. And even in journalism, I remember interviewing one of APRC, former Jammeh's deputy party leader, one of them, and he said to me, "You are UDP." And I could not defend. There was nothing I could at all put. I said, is it because I am a Mandinka? Because the UDP leader is Mandinka? So sometimes we are defined just because we are a certain tribe and the leader of that group, a certain opposition or a political party is that tribe. So naturally you are aligned to that group. And it has really gotten so bad in our country. Everything is looked into, political lenses is looked into tribe and all that. I know Senegal doesn't have a lot of that. It was crippling during Macky Sall times sometimes, but in Gambia it's really, really bad. And I think that is one thing, we are used to. At one point I said to people, you call me UDP, so what? That is all news, because at this point I'm used to that. So you have to you have to be prepared. And that comes to what she was asking as young people in the media who are looking forward to coming to the media. If you're going to practice, especially a young female in Africa, you have to be mentally prepared. You have to be strong. I remember early days of Kerr Fatou when I used to, because I have marketing background, I had a lot of partnerships, sponsorships, and some of my female colleagues would tell me, "Oh, you're the only one who get all the sponsors." But there was an underlying tone to all of these conversations because I'm a lady, or they think there's other means that I'm doing, that's why I'm getting all these sponsorships. They were not looking at my potential as somebody who can attract sponsorships, but they thought because I'm a female, so that is why I'm getting all this. And that was very insulting. It was more like, oh, because you're attracting men, that's why you're getting this, but not your talent. And that is something that is really common out there. We are looked at as the less inferior people, and so we don't get things through merit, but
Gambia's version of DEI.
Yeah, and so you get stuff because you are just a female, and then you can get it. But also a lot of bullying, a lot of stereotyping, looking at you. I get a lot of that. Just today, there was this post that I made on Facebook about some ruling that happened, and I said it before. And one of the comment section, somebody said to me, "Oh, because you're the mayor's side chick." Before, that would have been really serious for me. I would have deleted that comment. But no, I'm used to those kind of things. And that's why I got worried. I get worried a lot about my staff because I can take all on this, but I've been in this industry for how many years? I started when I was 18. So I'm used to that now. But these young people, they are not used to this bullying. They are not used to all of this name calling. Security, my team.
Sexism.
I remember in the early days when my female reporter went to the president, covered the president's meet the people, thought she was harassed. Sally Job, she was harassed and called names in the midst of everybody. It was so ashamed. She was so ashamed we had to withdraw her. And at some point we go to these coverages and I tell, if it is political rallies, I tell them take our tag off because we don't want to be identified. Sometimes I have to take reporters that they don't identify because we want to be there. But we don't also want to be harassed because we have been harassed multiple times. So at some point, we do these tactics of removing our tags and taking reporters that are not very much identified, they are not in the camera, just to protect them. And it's been tough, but that is one of the things that we face, but we know how to go around it. Sometimes you'll just say, you know what, let's watch it from live feeds and take videos and walk on stories because we cannot be in the field because it's dangerous. That is something that we also have to choose sometimes to say, do we send somebody in this place or do we just take the feeds from the presidency or other media houses? And talking about being ethical and also sustaining your financial situation is the most difficult balance for us. I remembered in the early days of this government, a state minister was involved in something like a scandal, like a fertilizer story that we broke. We used to have the best investigative reporter in my team. And when he is working on stories, sometimes I'll just say, you know, Mustafa, work on this story, but let's have a good timing because I want to make sure I renew my contracts first before we put this out. I remember when that story was coming out, I was working with a bank to have access to a loan to go buy equipment because we didn't have any equipment, and everything was approved. We were just waiting for the contract for the money to be deposited in our accounts. Thursday evening, I still remember this. We dropped that story about a sitting minister that was involved in a scandal, fertilizer scandal. In the morning, around midday Friday, around 11 o'clock, I got an email to say, oh, we need this document and that document and that document from a bank, a private bank. Mm-hmm. And they made it so difficult. They had to cancel that request. That was genuine, that was approved. But because for them, they couldn't imagine us having such a damning report on a minister, a sitting minister. What does that mean for our financial situation? That contract, that loan application was canceled. We had to go through all over again in the next year. So that are some of the challenges. But what we have done, I said to Sheriff the others, I said, you know what? He called me and said, Fatou, you're getting a little bold now. I said, you know what? At some point I felt like all of these sponsorships and these contracts were holding me back. Now I feel so free. I don't have to worry about GRA telling me, be careful, we're sponsoring. I don't have to worry about another institution. Now I know whatever resources I'm getting through, some of our supporters being regular members on our channels or sending us stars through Facebook or from our YouTube channel. So, and some other sources that we get. So I don't have to worry about all of this. So sometimes it's tough to have a balance, but we have been managing and we're there. We are not, comfortable as we speak, but we're trying to make sure we just minimize our spending and also be able to help, fund ourselves through small sponsorships.
Yeah, I think we have 5 minutes left now. So William, if you could round up. Since it's an ongoing conversation, I think we have so much. Yeah. Journalists have a lot of information to share.
Yeah. So are you able to hear?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I think there are three areas. The one, social media. The other is the issue of colonial laws. And then, of course, what the journalists in the US probably would like to learn from us. Now, on social media, I would like to say that social media has really come in to help in the agitation, especially like for the young people and even for media people. It's useful. It is useful actually, but it has its, it has other things around it. So, like right now, people are talking about AI and so on. So it has also brought in surveillance. State security and so on are on you. And then you become a person of interest. Personally, I've become a person of interest many times, even in my own country. So you've got to think about that. But it is useful. It has been during the Gen Zs and so on. It has a mobilizing power, and that the governments fear it. As we speak now, I think there are around 22 African governments that have attempted to shut down the internet or slowed it for some reason. So I think social media, it's gonna continue to help and so on. But I think we're also trying to get the journalists to be trained on the hygiene of it, Now, on the history of the colonial laws and so on, I would like to say that even from the analysis that we did last year, it was a desk review of the laws. I can tell you that most of the laws that are being used by the African countries were inherited from the colonial, powers, the French, the Portuguese, the English people, and therefore they remain the way they are. But some countries have attempted to reform those laws, but sometimes there's also what we call clawback. You will find that we have good laws. There have been attempts at reforming it, even making provisions in the constitution. Then a new regime comes and tries to have a clawback on what was essentially progressive. That has happened in many countries. I mean, even in my own country called Kenya, we have what is called one of the most progressive constitutions. We borrowed from America, borrowed from South Africa and Nigeria. But then even now, between 2010 and now, we have had certain amendments that threaten the very essence of that constitution. And we have provision, for example, Article 33, 34, and 35. 34 is the one that deals with the media. For it even to be realized so that is implemented fully, we still have difficulties. In the Kenyan context, we are grappling with 21 laws that were in the previous, constitution or were actually, we consider them in a violation of the current constitution because they were supposed to have been amended, but they have not been amended. 13 years later, now 15 years later, since we passed the new constitution, they have not been aligned to the new constitution. And like the issues of defamation and so on. So you'll find that in one province, the authorities are aware that a law has been repealed. In another province, they are using the same law. By the time you get the journalists out, is a problem. So that cuts across Africa in terms of the laws. They are still in those stages of colonial, and some have been strengthened to harm freedom of expression, press, and so on. On journalists in the US, I think, the Western world, the journalists in the Western world and in the US, you will need to be less idealistic about your situations. Democracy and that things working and so on, because increasingly you realize that there are challenges to over 200 years of the US, stable system, democracy, the witch amendments and so on. And now suddenly, what you thought was a fairly comfortable and predictable, way of doing things isn't the same. So I would invite the journalists in the US to begin interrogating their own democratic systems, what they took for granted, and begin to say, hey, what have we taken for granted? What has been working perfectly? What is not working now? And how will from one regime to another? Sometimes it's not even the Republicans and the Democrats, it's the person. Like in this case here, we have had Republicans before, but Trump is a different type of Republican. So he's actually creating a whole new thinking within America and of course globally. I can tell you that in Kenya, America was fairly highly regarded. And as my sister there from Gambia said, whenever we had problems, and I can tell you, I have, from my student days, I'm an activist like my colleague from Gambia. I've been in protests. I was arrested during my student days when we were fighting for the return of multipartyism. So I've been in the trenches all along. So, when I see protests, it is like I want to move in there. But now, of course, I'm a journalist and press freedom advocate. Now, what I think, if you look at the view that many Kenyans have of America or the UK or so on, they no longer trust them as the paragons of democracy, the paragons of good governance, because generally it is thought that they often interfere in our elections. Even the European Union, within the diplomatic circles and all the kind of convenings we have with them, we've got to have difficult conversations about how they look at Africa and how they look at the elections locally. For example, the European Union, we have told them what the European Union is being remembered for, or even some of the Carter Center and all the observers, they are in big hotels having a few press conferences and hardly go even to the estates in Nairobi, and then they issue a statement about the election being free and fair. I mean, people are mad at them because how can you come into our country for 1 week, get yourself into the most expensive hotel in Nairobi, and then at the end of it, you make a declaration about how the elections were free and fair, and people are fighting in the streets, and others were killed. Journalists were even beaten up and equipment destroyed. Yeah, so I think in conclusion, I would just say that, and for American journalists, generally from Africa, we seem to think that Americans generally, including the journalists, seem to be looking too much inward. They are self-contained. Everything is about America. So you don't look at what is happening elsewhere. You need to look at what is happening in Africa. If there's anything you want to learn from us, we'll be happy to share information with you so that you see the difficulties, the challenges that you now begin to also experience. As my brother said, welcome to our world. We have serious challenges and want to share some of this with you.
Okay. Well, no, we will. Okay, 1 minute. Okay.
I want to add to what they've just said. I just want to give my brother there and then journalists in US a practical example of how we can help them. You see, in Africa, most of us as journalists, we learn from the job. Like I believe my brother did, because he said he wants to now go to the university. I personally worked in a known Ghanaian media house, a big one, as such, for 4 years without pay. But I woke up each day and I went to work as a regional correspondent. I was taking care of a region that is now being divided into 3. And I was just that person running around the biggest region in Ghana. I was doing that without salary for 4 years. Mm-hmm. What is the difference? The typical American journalist starts from a salary base and they grow to it. So you are used to the luxury. And so suddenly Trump is saying, I'm taking away your funding sources, and then you are crumbling. Us, we started with nothing and we build ourselves and we become resilient. So if it is one lesson that we want to teach the American journalist, is that we have known suffering. We've been doing this job without any support. And so even if USAID Ghana and USAID Kenya is not bringing us a penny, we will still survive better than you, the American journalists here, because we have built resilience. And we've done this through selflessness and passion. It's been passion driven all this while, not necessarily because we were getting monies to do this job, but we're doing it because we love our continent and we're doing it wholeheartedly. So perhaps journalists in America should learn to begin working not because there is some money sitting somewhere for them, but because they really love their country and they want to see their country move forward.
Okay. Well, I think on this note, there's nothing for me to add as a sum up, other than to say that this is the story of African journalists. I am also I'm part of that story I've practiced journalism for more than 20 years with no pay. My first salary was as a graduate student in the US. And this is my second conventional employer, the Brown. So, yes, we will.
I guess I'm the luckiest one. I've always been paid.
Well, so we will have more time to talk about this. We have a coffee break for 15 minutes. The next panel will be on investigative journalism, techniques and challenges. That will be moderated by Professor Ann Wallace, who is my mentor as well. So, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.